This is Peter Duff, and you're listening to my chapter of As the Story Grows.
Welcome to the next chapter of As the Story Grows. I'm Brian Patton. This week, recording engineer Peter Duff joins the podcast. Peter has stepped out and released his first single as a solo artist called The To-Do List. Peter also plays guitar in pop-punk band Hard to Hit. This was a fun connection to make, as a lot of Peter's history and trajectory is similar to mine. Peter talks about his sheltered upbringing, his desire to learn every instrument possible, and his career as an audio engineer. Then he talks about how COVID enabled him to release his first single as a solo artist and depression among musicians and creatives. I'm a big fan of Peter's single, and I hope you guys enjoy it. So I was looking at your website. You grew up in California, Sacramento?
Yep. Yeah, originally from Rockland, which is a suburb of Sacramento. It's one of the most boring and white privileged places you've ever seen. It often ends up on the top of greatest places to raise a kid in the country, lists.
Nice.
Which I think it's just code for it's white, low crime, has enough property taxes to pay for schools. So,
right.
From Sacramento originally. I moved to Southern California to go to Cal Poly Pomona to get a degree in music industry, which is basically recording, production, and business on top of a traditional music degree. And then after graduating, I got married, and my wife got a job in San Diego, so we moved down there for a while.
Awesome.
And I'm recently back up in Rockland for now during the pandemic, since everything's remote and online. It didn't make sense to pay for Southern California rent and whatnot. So yeah.
Good times. What was growing up like?
I was the weird shrimpy kid. Not like my dad wasn't like a super traditionally masculine guy, so I didn't have a whole lot in common with people. I was kind of on the outside because I didn't really play sports, didn't know anything about sports, anything like that. So, a little bit outcasty, kind of the weird nerd and everything. And the other notable thing was that I wasn't allowed to watch any TV or anything or video games growing up. So I had another layer of isolation from everybody that I just didn't know anything was kind of going on in the culture. So weird dorky kid, but it was good. I had some good friends and whatnot, but yeah, those are kind of the main sort of significant things from childhood.
Yeah. Well, what got you into music? Because it doesn't sound like that sort of sheltered upbringing opens you up to music discovery.
Yeah, so it was a little not that my parents were in any way restrictive or anything. I had a great family life and everything like that. Sure. But I think I got into music pretty non-traditionally or differently than most other musicians I know and talk with and stuff. My family didn't really listen to a lot of music. My dad would have the classical radio station on in the car, and occasionally my mom would listen to a Simon and Garfunkel record. But that was basically it. Otherwise, like they're big readers, and so there's no sound in the house and all that kind of stuff. But when I was in third grade, the middle school concert band was doing kind of a tour of the elementary schools and playing their middle school band stuff and kind of showing the kids, like, here are all the different instruments to try to get kids excited and stuff. And I remember the defining moment of wanting to play music was they showed what a trombone was, and they showed the slide, and I'm like, that's kind of a silly and wacky thing. And I was a really silly and wacky kid. And the guy playing the trombone, like, I don't know if it was planned or not, but he ended up chasing like a clarinet girl around the stage, trying to hit her with his slide. And so I thought, that looks like a great way to torture my sister while quote unquote practicing, and so I can't get in trouble for it. So fifth grade, when I was old enough to be in the band, I started playing trombone. Middle school, I picked up saxophone and electric guitar, and added bass, piano, drums in high school. Kind of got into through electric guitar, started jamming with friends. That became a little garage band, and I took it way too seriously. And, so that's what kind of pushed me into all this.
What led you to want to just keep learning to play different instruments as opposed to like honing in on one specific one?
That's a really interesting question. When I picked up trombone, for whatever reason, my first music goal was I wanted to learn how to play all the brass instruments. All right. I don't know why, but that's just kind of what my fifth grade brain wanted to do. And so my plan was, and next year I'm going to learn trumpet. Next year I'll learn something else, so on and so forth. So yeah, I guess there always just was some wanting to learn about it. I think that's, I don't feel like I come from like a super traditional music background, and it's like, oh, I grew up with music playing all the time and I love the music, and like, but more like, I think it was really fun to like learn how to play the trombone. And there's something in music and in other things in life, I'm very like interested and excited about, like learning skills. Like I've taught myself how to like repair guitar amplifiers and like make craft cocktails, and I've been really into cooking lately and stuff. So I think it's just like this wanting to get good at things. And I guess this is kind of a therapy session, because in saying that, I think I'm having a realization that like one thing I've thought about with music is like, I was a small, shrimpy, dorky kid. I wasn't competitive at sports. And so, here's an opportunity for me to do something quote unquote cool. That would give me an excuse to hang out with other kids. And, if I'm a good guitar player, you have to hang out with me, even though maybe you wouldn't otherwise. But, I think I was watching everybody else try to get really good at, basketball, or really good at X, Y, or Z. And this was a thing I could try to get really good at. So I think the learning, the desire to learn skills is probably a lot of it. And that translates and continues through my career as like a recording engineer and a mixing engineer and all that kind of stuff. Yeah.
No, it's just funny how kind of similar our backgrounds like check, because I started playing trombone.
Oh yeah.
But I was terrible, and I discovered punk rock, and I was like, well, I just want to play guitar instead.
There you go.
And then I picked up drums and took 3 years of music theory and went and got my degree in recording engineering. And so
oh, cool. Awesome. Yeah. Where did you go for that?
Omega Studios, just a trade school in Maryland.
Okay.
So
gotcha.
Yeah, that's cool. So you were taking GarageBand real seriously in high school. Did you continue to try to make that work out, playing music?
Yeah. So in high school, my goal definitely became like, I want to be a guitar player. I want to be a songwriter. I want to be in a band. I want to be on the road. And the guys in my band were all super good friends. Most of them still are. All of them still are. So it was like super fun thing. Hanging out, playing shows was awesome. I was like, yeah, let's do more of this. I think I was trying to convince everybody, like, let's take a year off and, try to do this. But, I actually met most of them in like the advanced gate class in 4th grade, and all of our parents come from like really education focused background.
Yeah.
My dad went to Harvard and Yale like a freak.
Oh man.
So the culture in my family and all my friends' families was you're going to college, and they were more realistic than me. So, they went on to do quote unquote serious things like law or engineering or whatnot. And I'm going, well, I really want to play in a band, but my parents say I have to go to school. So I'm going to go, learn, recording and that kind of stuff.
That so tracks. Yeah. You're like, well, if the music thing doesn't work out, I'm going to pick a career and schooling that is as close to music as I can get.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's awesome. What was that education experience like for you? And I mean, were you into recording before you went to school, or did you have any idea of what you're getting into?
So the band in high school, we recorded one song with like a family friend, and it came out really bad. And we ended up sending it to somebody else to like try to mix and salvage it. And that was kind of like being able to see the difference between what one guy did with it and this other guy did with it. Was like, oh wow, like there's so much you can do on the back end. Like this is really interesting and cool. And I think because I found out early on that like you could start with kind of crappy sound and end up with something that sounds pretty decent at the end. I decided that the most cost-effective way to produce an EP after that was going to be to try to do a lot of the recording myself and then send it off to somebody to mix. So, but I knew that, doing drums is the most gear intensive part of the process. I wasn't going to be able to afford that much gear, know what I was doing. So we went and rented studio time from a place in Sacramento called the Formulation Room. And then we tracked, I tracked guitars, keys, bass, and vocals at my mom's house, converting the bathroom into a little vocal booth, and got a DigiDesign M box and worked on Pro Tools 7 and just a couple mics and did all that and sent it off to somebody. So I kind of had a bit of experience doing that. I thought that was cool. We ended up working with one other, the guy that did the good mix for us. We went back and recorded a single with him later, start to finish. And we went in for a drum day one day and then came back for the next session and listened to what he had done with like the editing and some mixing on the drums. And I was like, holy cow, these drums sound, amazing. Like totally better than when we were here recording. Like, what did you do? Yeah. And he was like, oh, I just sprinkled some fairy dust on them. And I was like, okay, that's what I want to do. Being a fairy dust sprinkler sounds fun. So I was definitely interested in recording at that point. But like you said, it was kind of like, I'm not in a band, but I have to do something. So I liked the program at Cal Poly, or I was interested in the program at Cal Poly because it was kind of a lot of stuff. And so I was kind of like, I'm going to go, I'll keep trying to be in a band. I'll see, what else is interesting. Maybe I want to do engineering or composing or teaching or, so on and so forth. And recording is just kind of the thing that sort of naturally worked out. Yeah.
Yeah. At this point, with your playing and band you were looking to be in, was there a sound or genre or records inspiring or influencing you?
Totally. At that point, my like two biggest influences were Anne Boleyn and Seosin.
Okay.
I actually ended up getting to take, when I was in college, I ended up getting to take guitar lessons with Justin from Seosin for like a year. It was super fun. But yeah, those were my main influences as far as like what I was writing. But I was mainly into, I noticed like a lot of other your guests into like Under Oath, Emery, all those like Tooth and Nail bands, that kind of scene. So that was kind of my, yeah, that's the kind of style of stuff I was into at that point.
That's cool. What was your studio trajectory? I know you started running a studio in 14. Did you just like
Yeah.
open up your studio right away, or was there a?
So so I started. I had some basic gear at the end of high school. I continued collecting a little bit of gear through college, and really I started recording stuff for myself and friends out of my dorm room the second year of college, which I decided to be an RA, resident advisor, so that I could get a single room all to myself, so that I would have space for some recording gear and stuff. And so I did that, learned kind of spent that year learning stuff and doing really basic things. The year after, for the last 2 years of college, I lived in a house that I rented with some friends off campus, and it was big enough that my room I set up as a control room with I slept on a futon, so that when I wasn't asleep, there was a couch in the back, and it was looked just like a studio that I happened to sleep in, and then there was like another den next to it that I set up as a live room. I kind of drilled a hole in the wall and tell our landlord and ran a snake through there. So I did that for a couple of years during college. That was still mainly working with friends from the music program and stuff like that. But my senior year, a couple people started paying me. And at the time I was working as a AV tech for our student center. So I was doing like live sound and stuff. But I started getting enough recording gigs that I was like telling my boss that I couldn't take as many hours. And I was realizing that, I'm making as much, making crappy recordings for people out of my house as I was at this other job, which actually paid really good as far as student jobs go. So I was like, I guess I'll give this a shot. So I quit that AV job, did another year of that early home studio. And then, like I mentioned earlier, I got married right after undergrad. And so I was lucky enough that my wife had a full-time job with a steady paycheck. So that gave me the flexibility to kind of go, okay, well, this sort of worked. I'll give it a shot and see what happens. I had also tried applying to some other like studio jobs and stuff. I had a internship, and the guy I worked with there was trying to get me a job at a studio in LA, and they finally got to me the day I was moving out of the house to go down to San Diego. So it was like, nope, not interested anymore. So I just kind of took a crazy chance in retrospect that seems really stupid and unlikely, but it worked out. And again, largely due to the support of my wife and my family and stuff. I wouldn't have been able to do it without them. I definitely recognize that and everything. But then I just kind of was in San Diego. It was a new area for me. Started going to shows, meeting people, advertising on Craigslist and Facebook, and eventually got some clients, which turned into repeat clients and referrals, and was able to give me enough work that I could do recording full time, which was everything I wanted at that point.
That's awesome. That's awesome. I saw you mentioned you're in Rockland, so you had to close the studio down in 2020 because of COVID. What led to that decision outside of just like, I guess people can't come in, you can't pay your bills, so you gotta.
So it was a bummer. I had a lot of work lined up for the spring of 2020 that I was excited to do. But it hit, and I actually am 99.9% sure that I actually had COVID early in the pandemic. It was early enough at that point that it was impossible for me to get a test unless I had traveled from China, which I hadn't. But that week, my wife and I had traveled to Baltimore and DC when we started hearing about oh, maybe this is going to be a problem and actually a thing. And around that time was when there were stories about like there was a big like conservative conference and it was a super spreader and they were all spreading. And later it was like, oh yeah, like there were cases that were traced back to the Baltimore airport. So I'm like, yeah. So felt like total garbage for a few weeks.
Oh man.
Honestly, like not severe, but I've had lingering kind of long haul symptoms since much, nowhere near on the scale of some of the things you hear on the report, but on the news, but definitely like super fatigued all the time.
Yeah, still a bitch.
Yeah. But because of that, I took it very seriously. I took it, I think, more seriously than most people early on. I was like, this is a big problem. This is everywhere before anywhere even started shutting down. So yeah. And I was able to get unemployment because they opened that up to self-employed people and stuff. So I was like, it's not worth it to, and the other thing is my studio space is pretty small, and anytime anybody over the 6 years I was there came into the studio with like the tiniest sniffles, like, oh, I had a cold 2 weeks ago, I'm good now. Every time I would get it. Because it's just like, you spend 14 hours sharing the same air with somebody. It's like, you can do as much distancing and masking as you want, but it's like not great. And I had it, so I was like, oh, I'm probably okay. I'm not going to get it again. But, there was no way to know that for sure. And, the studio was part of my house. And so I didn't, my wife and I didn't want people coming into our living space
for sure
from all over the place that who knows what they're doing. So, so yeah, that it sucked. And, it was kind of like a blow of like, I worked for almost a decade to build this thing, and now I have to shut down for reasons beyond my control. And yeah, so I was, just kept waiting around for, oh, maybe we'll be able to open in June. Maybe we'll be able to open in, and, so I was thinking like, oh, I'll do some remote mixing work and eventually I'll be able to open back up. Probably and start doing some tracking work again. But the other factor was that my wife was starting a grad program in the this last fall. So it was kind of like, okay, what's going to happen during that? So when it became clear that things still weren't opening, it was like, okay, she's leaving her job. I don't have in-person work. It doesn't make sense to have this space. Who knows when I can comfortably have people over again. So, yeah, it's like maybe I could have toughed it out or done some things to, feel like it was safe, but it didn't seem
worth it.
Like the most responsible choice or worth it. Yeah, exactly. So, yeah.
That sucks.
Yep.
I noticed on your website you have a section for like podcasting, editing podcasts. Is that something you came into in 2020 as you're working remotely trying to gain work, or was that something you were doing previously?
I've done, my studio and my work had always basically been, I'm not like a huge hotshot or anything. It's not like bands were lining up to work with me. Like I did have a good client base in San Diego, but for a long time, until like the last couple of years, I was basically like, you have an audio project, you have money, cool, great, let's do it. So I've recorded audiobooks, I've recorded episodes for podcasts, and one of the coolest project I had that wasn't music was I did the sound editing and mix for a documentary called Minimalism, which is on Netflix, actually. So I was like, so I started getting some experience doing non-music audio projects. And I'm just as much of a nerd about the audio itself as the music. So that stuff is interesting to me. So since the fall, I've been working on like one podcast every week for a show called The Best Boss Ever, which is super fun. It's really cool. And yeah, it's the main reason for pursuing that kind of stuff is just to have the more work I can do remotely, the more comfortable and easy things hopefully will be.
Yeah, that's cool. I want to talk about the new single, obviously, but you talk about getting connected with Hard to Hit.
so I had a band in high school, wasn't able to find a band all of college, was in San Diego, going, I'm married, I have a studio, I have everything I want, but I still really want to be in a band and, kind of touring and giving it a quote unquote serious shot was definitely something on the bucket list that I had to do. And I spent a few years looking for various bands, and tried to start several bands with people that fell apart, since how it goes. I had something that I was really into, and then the other guy moved to South Carolina. So yeah, I was just looking. I had basically given up, but just checked Craigslist on a whim one day and saw an ad for something that looked intriguing, and so I emailed him, and he sent me back. It didn't even say what the band was. It was just looking for a guitar player for pop punk or whatever. And he sent me the stuff. I was like, oh, I've seen this band. They've I've gone to one of their shows to try to I tried to get them to come record with me. I'm like, these guys are super cool. And they had recorded a couple new songs in between, and I was like, this stuff is really cool. This seems like it has potential. It's exactly what I was looking for. So yeah, I went and tried out for them. They liked me, and that's how I got connected with them. From there, we finished writing an EP, which I did all the recording and production, mixing and mastering for, and did a couple small tours up and down the West Coast, and so I got to have that experience. It's been I took a break from them for a couple of years because our singer left and nothing was really happening, and I had a lot of studio work, but we're now all back kind of trying to work on some stuff remotely, and hopefully someday we'll be putting out some more stuff, and hopefully even get to play some shows once things open up. That would be such a luxurious different thing that seems unfathomable right now, but
I know.
So, I was like, oh, I should get back with these guys, because I'm gonna be jealous of everybody else getting to play shows in a few months.
Right, that seems where we're headed.
Yeah, hopefully
tours are being booked again. It's wild.
Yeah.
Well, I guess you're releasing, I guess it's not officially out yet, the To-Do List.
Yes.
I assume this comes from, I have some extra time on my hand and all this gear, and I want to make music.
Yes. Primarily, so I've always been a songwriter and a producer and a guitar player and an engineer and everything, but I've never considered myself a vocalist, because I'm not a vocalist and I'm not a great but yeah, I was kind of like, I have this time off. I've always wanted to, when you work in the studio with bands and stuff, it's super fun, but at the end of the day, it's their song, and they get to make all the final calls, and I'll be like, this is a super cool thing I tried in the mix. And then you get the feedback and you're like, yeah, I don't like that, change it. And I was like, I got to just do something that's actually me start to finish, and kind of see what happens, and like Hard to Hit. I'm like, okay, I feel like I have to give it a shot, if I have the opportunity to. And a lot of it, the song is about, in part, the frustration of not being able to write songs and not being able to finish anything and put anything out. And so, I started feeling like I all the time will just little instrumental kind of ideas, but then nothing happens with them because I'm not a singer and I hate writing lyrics. So I wrote the song about not liking to write lyrics and all that stuff. And made that the theme of it, and kind of told the first working title of it was, I'm going to finish this. And then that made me too anxious in my head about it. And so I changed it to, if it's not fun, it won't groove. Yeah. And then once it finally ended up having some lyrics and a theme, then it became the To-Do List. And it was kind of like, okay, this actually looks like something that, I feel like as soon as I have a vocal for something, then that's the point where it's like, this could be a song.
Yeah.
Songs need to be sung. They need to have vocals. Otherwise they're just like instrumental things. And I wasn't going to put out instrumental stuff. So yeah, that's a long way of saying, yes, I had time. I wanted to do something for myself, and decided to stick with one thing instead of bouncing back and forth between a million projects and never finishing them. And even then, it took me about 6 months to write and record and put all this stuff together for it. But
right now I couldn't get I'll put it on there to do this. Just put it on there to do this. Put it on there to do this. Just fuck this.
I think it was very successful. It's a super catchy hook. It's
Thanks.
it's a great song. It like reminds me of early Granddaddy and like early Mart. I don't know if you listen to those bands, but
you will probably say several bands, and I will know none of them since, again, I wasn't raised with music playing in the house, and have spent all my once I became interested in music, I've spent all my time making music and working on music. So I listen to the same song for 8 hours a day instead of actually listening to a lot of different things. But to me, it's kind of like the biggest influence for it was Two Door Cinema Club, their game show album, the first song on it. I really liked the feel of that. So I was basing it on that. And also like, I have the pop punk background, which I think is kind of in there somehow. But then also stuff like Death Cab for Cutie. Yeah. And like, there's this guy, Dan Kroll, that has like really interesting production stuff. So the other thing was I was trying, like I've done stuff in the studio where, it's pop punk or it's, metalcore or something. And there's like kind of a certain way that it wants to sound, like distorted guitars, it's got to hit hard. Yeah. I love doing that kind of stuff. And on the other side, like I've done like folk albums and stuff like that. And it's like, just make it sound really natural, And so everything in the studio is always, there's kind of a specific, you have to make it sound like this. Not, obviously with the space for everybody to be their own artists and stuff, but just kind of accepted. So this, I was like, I'm just going to try to make a lot of weird sounds. I want you to like listen to it and go, is that a synth? Is that a piano? Is that something else? And just tried to use any of the like every time I would work on something in the studio, there'd be like one little thing. It's like, oh, that's cool. I haven't tried that before. And so I just like took all those little things that I stole from people and kind of, let's try to make something that's weird and, different. And yeah. It's got to me, it's got like a mid 2000s vibe. Like at the same time as like Interpol and the Strokes were happening, there was like this more quirky independent music that was happening. And that's what it reminds me of. And it's the right genre for me. And yeah, it was an instant hit. You said it took you a long time to get this song done. So you're just releasing the single. Yeah.
You have grand plans for an EP or an album now after this? Or?
So kind of, short answer, no. I have no idea what I'm doing next. I've been kind of, waiting around to put this out, see what the reaction is, see if anybody cares. If anybody does, maybe I'll make more stuff like this. But I've also been working on creating a YouTube channel where I talk about like music production and like the mental health stuff that basically all musicians deal with. Yeah. And trying to talk about that more openly, honestly, which is the other thing that the song is about. But so I've been doing a lot of different things. So I'm putting this out. If people like it and want to hear more, I guess let me know and maybe I will. But also on the YouTube channel platform, kind of just using that as an opportunity and outlet to just try to make a bunch of different stuff and see what happens. Like I'm obviously into pop punk as well. I've, been, always been interested in being like a film score composer or something like that. So Yeah, you may see a number of things from me that don't make sense in the context of like, here's an EP, this is what Peter Duff sounds like. It might be a bunch of weird random stuff, but I do really like how this came out in this kind of vibe. So good chance I would work on some more stuff like that. It's probably a question of, can I force myself to write more lyrics?
Yeah.
And if I can, there will be songs, and if I can't, then there won't be. Or I may shift to focusing on trying to do collaborations. So if any of your listeners have lyrics, send them my way and maybe we'll do something. On my YouTube channel, I'm trying to have conversations with other musicians and talk about what I think are the quote unquote kind of like bigger things than how 5 ways to use reverb in a mix or, blah, blah, blah. And, when I read articles that are, there's, I constantly hear like, 70% of musicians experience depression or anxiety, or musicians are 4 times more likely to have suicidal thoughts than non-musicians. And I think that it's really just like interesting and fascinating to me, and like sad to me that like people that aren't musicians, and obviously lots of musicians as well, but lots of people are like, music is this thing that makes me feel better, and like, like your music saved me when I was feeling bad. But the flip side of it is that like a lot of the musicians trying to make that stuff, like there's some like, why is that relationship there? That this thing that is so positive and beneficial to people in, like whatever you want to say, enjoying life or having, like passion or like expressing emotion and stuff. Why do the people making that have such an adverse reaction, and is it actually related to the process of making music, or the process, or like the way, I think a lot of it's, the way that an art form and creative practices don't really fit naturally into a capitalistic society, and all the anxiety and frustration that comes with that. And, or, is it the flip side where people that are more likely to be depressed get into music because it's a way for them to deal with it, and then you're just still depressed, So, I think and I've, dealt with depression for a really long time. And it's, like, and working in the studio, I've recorded lots of songs about that kind of stuff and talked to lots of my clients about, their depression or suicide. Or I've had recording sessions where, I've had to like stop and take a break because somebody's in the vocal booth. I'm like, are you gonna have a panic attack? Like, it's okay. Like, we're just recording and making something, but people get so invested and like tied up and stuff emotionally that, we all deal with this stuff and don't really talk about it super openly. It's like we write songs about it, and that's definitely a kind of openness and a kind of expression. But then, I don't know, a lot of it kind of gets buried, and, you'll hear about it in, like, here's a concert raising money for this suicide prevention organization, or, all that kind of stuff. But I'm really hoping to kind of start more conversations with people one-on-one about their own experiences, and specifically like, why do you think, what does music have to do with that? So that's kind of a big thing I'm trying to explore. And a lot of what I talk about in the to-do list is, I say like, I used to feel that direction, and I don't know what's going on, kind of like my current situation, and like, like maybe I need to try really hard to fix my situation, and maybe that'll make it better, but doing too much of that just stresses you out and can make things worse. And I also talk about like, the second verse, like, I'm on a ton of antidepressants and stuff, and am I rotting my brain with pot and video games, and like I should drink less and all these things. And then it's like, here are all these problems that I've identified, and the courses I'm going to put them on the to-do list because
Yeah.
fuck it.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's kind of what that's all about.
Just put it on the to-do list. Put it on the to-do list. Just fuck this. Oh, put it on the to-do list. Just put it on the to-do list. Put it on the to-do list. Just fuck this.
Thanks for listening to As the Story Grows. Our theme song was written and composed by the legendary Bob Nana. If you like what you hear, subscribe on iTunes and give the show a rating and review. If you'd like to support the show financially, click on the Patreon link at asthestorygrows.com. If you enjoyed this episode, share it on social media with your friends. Much appreciated, and thanks for listening.
I never felt so young